Hello everyone, it's Parisha from The Artistic Scroll, and in today's Procreate tutorial, we're diving into an ocean-themed treasure chest. We'll be crafting the intricate wave patterns that flow across the chest delicately, adding a weathered metallic texture that gives off a ghostly bluish-green glow reminiscent of the deep seas, and finishing it off with a glowing blue ambience that brings the whole piece together beautifully. So to follow along, you'll need your iPad, Apple Pencil, and the Procreate app. Don't forget to download the free sketch file and color palette for this illustration from the Artistic Archive. It's packed with everything you need to get started, and the link's below in the description. So once you've got your sketch and palette ready, let's dive in and create this enchanting treasure chest. Welcome guys, so this is what your canvas will look like once you download it from the Artistic Archive. And as you can see, you've got the sketch here already on layer 1. So let's just rename this as sketch. And what we need now is our color palette, which you've also downloaded from the Artistic Archive. And we can just find it, set it as default, and then move the color palette to the left. Alright, so now we can change the blend mode of our sketch layer to multiply, and then reduce the opacity down to around 30%, just dark enough that you're able to make out the outline comfortably. Now we're going to create a new layer by tapping on the plus sign and then moving it under the sketch layer. So we're going to start off by using the technical pen brush in inking in the brush library, and we'll be painting in the frame of the treasure chest first. So let's use this gray color. That'll be our metal color for the frame, and we can go ahead and get started by painting in the outline first, and then we'll be filling it in. So we're only painting in the top half of the treasure chest first in this layer, and the lower part will be in a different one. Alright, so the top half is done. Fill it in. Make sure there are no spaces, any white gaps. Fill those in too. Okay, and once you're happy, we're going to move on to the lower one. So let's create a new layer below this top frame layer and we'll paint in this lower section. Now the feet of these, basically, the feet of the treasure chest will be on a separate layer too, so you can just create these first. Then remember to close your shape and fill it in. Okay, right, so no white gaps, happy with that. Also remember we have these two bars here as well in this lower half section, so let's fill those in too. Okay, and this is done. So we'll be moving on to the feet now, and to make that we're going to create a new layer below this layer, below the lower frame layer, and let's paint in the feet. Okay, and then move on to the other one. Alright, so these are created. Next we're going to make the base of the treasure chest. I've just noticed I didn't cut this one out, so let me go back to the top layer, and you can see this particular section which has all the patterns in it, that actually needs to be a separate one. So I am just going to use the select tool for this. Okay, and we will clear that. Oh, that should have done. There we go. I don't know why that clear one didn't work, but it's okay, as long as we've got this. Maybe it would have worked, but it's not really a problem, is it? So let's just make a nicer, a cleaner outline. Oh, that's too much. Alright, much better. Okay, so now for the base part, we'll create a new layer below the lower frame layer, so that's just above the feet. Let's create a new layer above that, and we'll select the sea green color, the turquoise color, and just for the top part, right here, we just need to be very careful about the outline here so that that is a perfect arc, just like that. And the rest of it can just be an abstract shape as long as you know where your end lines are and they're not going into the feet. Well, technically we can even move this below the feet layer, and then yeah, I think that would take care of everything, isn't it? See, you learn everything. I mean, as I'm teaching you, I'm learning things here as well. So yeah, we could just move this below the feet layer, and there you go. That's all fine. Alright, so now that we've created this base layer, we're going to paint this star now. So we're going to create a new layer above the top layer, the top frame layer, and we're going to still use the technical pen brush, and we'll use the gray color this time. So let's go ahead and paint in this frame. Okay, to be able to see a bit better what I'm doing, I'm going to reduce the opacity of both of these frames. and then fill it in. Okay, so next we're going to create a new layer above the star frame layer, and with the same turquoise color, we'll be painting in the interior star. And then fill that in. Alright, so that's created, that looks great. Next we'll be painting in these white dots. So we're going to create a new layer on top of this. Select this white color. I'll be painting in one section of these first. Just make sure that they're a perfect circle by just holding down. Oops. Do it this way, hold down, and then let go of your pencil to form a perfect circle. There you go. So once you've created this, we don't really need to do anything. We'll just duplicate this and then rotate them into position. Unless you want to go ahead and paint in all of them. That's fine too. I think we'll be okay with just duplicating them, and then we can combine all of them together. All right. Okay, so these are all done. Let's go ahead and combine them all together by just pinching all the layers together, and there you go, they're all on one layer now. Great, so we're going to create one more layer on top, and then with the same grey colour we'll be painting in the frame of this keyhole. Okay, so that looks great. So next we'll be painting in these gem sockets that we have here on the upper frame. So let's go ahead and firstly let's group all of our star layers together. We're just going to rename this group as star, and then we're going to create a new layer below the star group, and we can start painting in with the same grey color these sockets. So just for the first two, as you can see, the one up there and the one up here. So these aren't perfect circles obviously because of their position, but for the others we just need circles. Okay. For some reason I'm getting this mark every time I make it a perfect circle. My iPad's extra sensitive today. Alright, so once these are created, we can then create another layer on top of this, and then with the same turquoise color, let's go ahead and paint in these gems. So again, other than the top two, the remaining ones are all circles again. Well, we'll be making them into like sphere-like gems, obviously, later on. Right now they just resemble circles. Alright, so these are all done. That looks great. Let's bring back the opacity of both of these layers now. And let's have a look. Okay, so we've got most of these flat colors over there already. Let's start working on this base now and add in all of these colors to the pattern. So to do that, we're going to create a clipping mask to the base layer. And then we'll be starting off by adding in some white color first. So let's go ahead and select this white color. And on this new clipping mask layer, paint in the foam first. I'm going to reduce the size of my brush to around 5% because I want these to be a bit finer in appearance. So just so that they're not very clunky. I mean, we'll be filling them in, but still. A finer brush size gives you more control, but also makes things more pixelated in a way. So I'm just going to go ahead and speed up the video a bit. And you can keep an eye on which ones are going to be white. Well, most of them are white, the top layers that we'll be making. Yeah. So I'm just closing the shapes here, as you can see. I've closed the shapes. They're not there in the sketch, but these shapes are actually closed here, just like that, so that you'd be able to fill them in like that. Okay? Right, now just on this side we'll be having only a few of these sections as white. We don't have to do all of them. So for example, this swirl, this one, and this last one. So these are all going to be white. The other dots and everything here, they'll be a different color later on, so don't worry about those right now. So this is basically the pattern that we're going to be repeating all over here. So yep, let's get started with more speeding up of the video, okay? Alright, so we're done adding all of the white foams. So if you just want to pause this screen so that if you want to refer to exactly where you have to place any of these colors, like of the white color basically, where you have to place the white color, go ahead and do that now. Alright, so next we're going to be moving on to adding some more color to this, and for that let's create a new clipping mask below the white layer, and we'll select the second blue color in our color palette. And for that, basically we want everything under this white layer to be painted this blue color, just like that. Alright, so let's do that on the other side as well. So that it looks like it's water, isn't it? And let's do the same for the top layer as well. There you go. That was quick. Alright, so once that is done, we're then going to be creating a new clipping mask on top of this layer. So a new clipping mask there, and then with this turquoise color we're going to be painting in this circle, this ellipse here, and some of these surrounding little circles there. So I know I've made two of these these ellipses here in the sketch, but you can use any of them really. I think I might just go with something in between both of them. We don't really need to be making any shadows or anything on it to make it a gem. If you want, you can always do that though. You can make it into a gem, just like how we'll be making gems later on, but I don't think we really need to, because it might take away from the really detailed illustration that we've already got going on. So as you can see, I've added in turquoise in all of these surrounding circles there. So let's just do the same for the ones up here as well. I'm just going back to fill in this gap. Alright, so now that we've got these colors in, that looks great. Next we'll be adding in a little bit more gradient in this blue section here, just to make it look a bit more oceanic, you know? So, oceanic? I don't know. One of those two. So we need to create a new clipping mask above this blue layer. This teal blue color, no, not teal blue. Is it teal blue? It's just blue, isn't it? Yeah, it's just blue. So we'll use this dark blue color here. And now we can switch to soft airbrush in the airbrushing section of the brush library. And you can have a brush size of around, I'd say, 10 to 13% or so. And all we really need to do is just add in a little bit of a gradient like that, just on this lower section. So make sure to leave a gap between this dark blue and the background blue color, because that is going to give us a nice gradient. And yeah, when you're done with that, you can add in a little bit of a splash of a color there. And yeah, I think that should be it. Just notice there are 2 white dots that we can add in that I didn't add, so I'm just gonna go back and add them in quickly. Alright, so let's go back to this dark blue shade layer, and then with the soft airbrush again as your smudge tool this time, you can go ahead and blend in just the top layer. Not the bottom one, just the top one. Just so that very gently, so that it gives us a nice gradient. But don't go overboard and make it too smooth and homogeneous. We should be okay with just an idea that it is blending. And gently smoothing into the lighter blue color in the background. Okay, so that looks great. Before we move further with anything, let's just add some more turquoise color to these feet here. So, alright, let's just quickly group our base layers together first, and then rename this group as base. And then for the feet, we're creating a new clipping mask. Select this turquoise color, and we'll go back to our technical pen brush. Paint in this. Okay, so that looks great. We've got all of our flat colors in now, and we can start adding in some shadows and highlights to hold up the illustration now. Okay, so let's start with the top frame first. We will create a new clipping mask for our upper frame layer, and then select the same gray color as the frame. And right now we're just adding in some shadows to these facets, basically these edges. So all we need to do is, oh, I didn't change the blend mode, sorry. Okay, so this new clipping mask, we will be changing the blend mode to multiply, and we can then go ahead and get started by adding in these edge shadows. We'll fill it in. Okay. And then I think this is a bit too dark, so we can reduce the opacity down to around 80%. And that looks fine. Okay. So just for the top one again, we know that this entire section, this area is something that is facing the light. The light's basically coming from 2 directions almost in this, somewhere around up here in this direction, and then something around from the front too. You can imagine that. So this area of the entire treasure chest is going to be in the dark. So we'll be painting in our edge shadows around this section too. Alright, so that looks fine. While we're at it, we can also add in some shadows for these sockets. So let's do that. Alright, so these look great. So next thing we'll be moving on to would be the lower frame. So let's create a new clipping mask there. Change the blend mode to multiply, and we already know we're going to keep the opacity down to around 80%, so let's just do that now. And while we're at it, we might even just add a shadow line just below this upper frame layer. Now play around with your brush size and see what's comfortable for you. For me to do this, I'm somewhere around 30-31%. And that's working for me. And this side doesn't really matter because we'll be painting in the entire side as a shadow anyway. Okay, and then also we've got the edges here too. And then perhaps we can just add a little shadow of this foot here, just like that. Alright, so that looks great. Let's move on to the feet now. And we'll create a clipping mask for that. Change the blend mode to multiply and reduce the opacity down to 80%. And now let's just paint in some shadows for the feet. And I think this one can be entirely in shadow. Alright, so that's looking great. Now, as you can see, even inside the shadow part, there are these edges which are bent inside, curved inside, so we kind of need to embellish that shadow a bit as well. So let's go ahead and do that now. And we will need to create a new clipping mask for that. To the top frame layer, change the blend mode to multiply, and then let's just repeat the same thing. Bring the opacity down to around 80%. And there you go. That looks much better, doesn't it? It's got more dimension in it. Dimension and depth. So I think, yeah, so for the top part, we just needed that. We might as well just go back to our first layer that we created, and let's just add a shadow for the star as well, because that is going to cast a shadow too. So maybe just something like this. Yeah, I think that works. And then we can also do the same thing for the lower frame one. Add in shadow there too. But just make sure that there's a step between the two, because remember that this star is, you can imagine that this layer, the top part, is above the lower frame. So there's a step between the two right here. So you can imagine that the shadow is going to be either really long, like thicker like that, or shorter. Okay, so that's that. Then we can create a new clipping mask for the lower frame layer. Change the blend mode to multiply and reduce the opacity to 80%. And once again, we're going to be adding in some more shadows here to the edges. Okay, and then let's just do the same again for the feet. So create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply, reduce the opacity down to 80%, and this time we can add in a little diagonal line like that. And then just like that. We don't need to add in an entire new shadow here for the lower one, because it's kind of consistent with the top part, as you can see. That's what we're trying to achieve here. So let's do the same for this section. Okay, and I think we can even add it a little bit more shadow for this end, and let's just repeat this here too and see if we can make a difference. Does it make a difference at all? It does, but I don't think we really need to add in some more there because they're already in the light, remember, so we really just need to enhance the ones in the shadows. So yeah, so that looks great. We've got our inner shadows painted in now. So the next thing we're going to do is work on the star frame the same way as well. So we've got a lot of layers already. Let's begin grouping these so that they're a bit cleaner and we don't get lost. So I'm just grouping the feet layers together, and we can rename this group as feet. Then I'm grouping the lower frame layers together, and then rename this group as lower frame, and the upper frame layers together, and we can rename this as upper frame. Alright, so now we're going to open up our star layer, star group, and select this gray frame layer that we had. Create a new clipping mask and then we're going to change the blend mode to multiply, and let's paint in the edge shadow. So you can imagine that this front face is obviously in the front with more light in it. The back edge, however, is in the shadows. Alright, so we've got our shadow here already. It's very dark, so let's reduce the opacity down to around 60%. Okay, we also want to have the same kind of, same kind of effect as we have here with the inner shadows. So let's go ahead and create a new clipping mask for this again. And then change the blend mode to multiply, and we'll reduce the opacity down to 60% again. And for this section, you can imagine that I think we can use the soft airbrush for this. So let's do one thing. Let's go ahead and select our initial star shadow layer. Okay. And then go back to this new layer that you've just created, and let's paint in some shadows just like that, just up till here. Leave this edge as it is, all right? Because I think that's more in the light, so it's fine. But then again, your new shadow starts in from this section again, and then you can just have a little bit more of a shadow right around in this section, while you can use the smudge tool slightly to blend in a little bit more of the shadow just around this edge. And I think that should work for this. Yeah. Also, we can add in some more shadow just on that one, because that's obviously more in the shadow. So there are three areas that you basically had to add in some shadows. It's this section, this one here, just ending in over at this point, and then just starting over here gently and then tapering down here. All right, so that looks great. Once you're done with this, we can go ahead and get started with adding in some patterns to the rest of this base. So we're working on the base now. All right, so now let's start working on the base, and we're going to create a new clipping mask. Change the blend mode of this layer to multiply. Multiply. Okay. And then we are going to select this second blue color. And let's go back to our technical pen brush and see. Yeah, so you can have a brush size of around 5% for this. And all we're going to really do is paint in this pattern. I think we can reduce the brush size a bit more, somewhere around 4 or 3%. Yeah, I think 4% is the magic number. So let's go ahead and just paint in these outlines. And I would also say, if you select this white foam layer and then go back to your new layer that you've made, you can add in this. It stops naturally, doesn't it? Doesn't let you go beyond the margins. So for curves like these, as you can see, we want the line to be at the bottom of this curve here, so that it doesn't go something like that, you know, that's not what we want. We want it to be as an edge, so that'll just look nicer in a way. So let's go ahead and paint in these lines, and as you can see, you know how there is continuity being maintained with this, so that's exactly what we're looking for. So it'll look something like that. So I'm just going to be speeding up the video now, and we're going to follow along just like this. Alright, so we are done adding on all of these lines, so let's go ahead and just turn off the sketch for a second and have a look. Yeah, I think that looks great. So now what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this layer now, alright? And then we're going to change the blend mode of the top layer, alright? So let's change it to add. Right, so you can see now it's suddenly glowing a lot more, but we want a bit more of a gradient between that dark blue color of the multiply layer and then this as well. So let's go ahead and do that. I've just noticed something. We might need to add in a little bit over here, which I totally forgot. Let me just do that same on this too. Okay, so that's there. Now what we're going to do is we will use the soft airbrush as the eraser tool. I'm just going to turn off our sketch layer, and we can now erase some of these areas very gently. Reduce the opacity of your eraser tool to around 50 or something, and then you can just gently start erasing some of these areas. As you can see, it's looking much better now. That if we possibly maybe just erase some of these areas here. Obviously I'm coming across areas that I haven't drawn in some of these lines. It's not good. If you're having the same issues, don't worry, you can always go back and add in some more. Should be fine, but definitely looks better with a nice gradient like this. So you can skip some areas like I am. I'm trying to keep this erased area consistent with these lines which are straighter, or basically they're not swirling. So that kind of looks better, I feel. Okay, so I have a couple of areas that I just want to go back and touch up once more. So I'm going to select this and just paint in this section again. And I think there was one here as well, yes. Alright, so that's looking great. I think we've got everything now. So just turn up the sketch, have a look. Yeah, I think it looks nice. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to be working on is adding in some highlights on the top areas of these. So we've got highlights inside the white area. We now need some highlights outside those as well. So let's go ahead and do that now. For that, we're just going to go ahead and create a new clipping mask on top, change the blend mode to add, and then we're going to use this darker blue color this time. Okay, we've still got our technical pen brush selected, and this time let's go ahead and select our white foam layer and then tap on invert here. So whatever we do not touch this white layer. Okay, go back to this new layer that you've created, and then now you can, I think, increase your brush size to around 7 or 8%. That's too much. 6% works. And then you can add in some highlights just around the edges. And they don't even need to be on all completely surrounding objects. As you can see, like some of the circles, I'm just doing a few of them. And even for all of these swirls, I have varying thickness of this highlight that I'm trying to achieve. That's completely fine. It just brings about more variation in a way, and that looks good. So let's go ahead and add in all of these. Alright, so I think we've got all of these details now, and they have all of these pretty highlights. Oops, don't need that. Okay, so I think that looks great. We've got edge highlights, and then we'll be working on some more things over here, so let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so let's get started by adding some more patterns to our blue section of the chest. So we're going to create a new clipping mask, and then we're going to change the blend mode of this one to overlay this time. And we also need our sketch layer to be turned on, and perhaps we can I think we can just change the blend mode of this so we can see it a bit better. Don't know if we'll be able to do that. Yeah, here we go. So we're able to see this section a bit better. So I've just changed it to add the sketch for just being able to see it a bit better. As you can see, it's easier to see on a darker surface, isn't it, if it's a bit lighter, if the sketch is a bit lighter. Alright, so we are on our overlay layer, the clipping mask, and what we need now is our technical pen brush, and we'll select the white color that we have here, and we are going to now just paint in the outlines like these. So again, my brush size is around 6%, and I think that works. And as you can see, because it's white, it's giving off a nice pattern itself, like there's a nice color gradient that's coming along with overlay blend mode as well. And we are able to take advantage of this gradient that we already have here, underlying with the teal blue and the darker blue color. And that's kind of getting enhanced with this overlay. So yeah, so let's just go ahead and work on all of these, and I'll see you once it's all done. Okay, so once you've created these, this looks great. We are now going to reduce the opacity of this layer down to around 50%. And then we can turn off our sketch layer, and you can see it looking very pretty. Got a nice gradient here already. It's looking nice and bright. Amazing. So we are going to duplicate this overlay layer now, all right? And then we're going to select the lower layer here. And let's turn on alpha lock for this layer. And we're going to select this darker blue color, the first blue color that we have there in our color palette. And then we're going to just fill layer. So you can see it's just turned blue all of a sudden. That's great. But we're going to change the blend mode of this layer now to screen. So all we've done is just basically, made it a bit of a different color here as well, instead of just having it white. And I think it adds to a bit more depth with the color instead of just having a bright white. So that looks great. Alright, so next we are now going to just duplicate this green layer as well that we've just created. And then we're going to change the blend mode of the lower one to darken. Okay, and then we are going to just move this a little bit. Now Procreate has this great ability to be able to, you can just tap the entire layer. So if you just go onto your transform tool there, all right, tap on that. So you basically just selected this particular layer, whatever's on there. And then all you just really need to do is tap a little below. Just one tap and it moves slightly below. Instead of having to deliberately move it around, you just tapped and it moves on its own. So that looks amazing already. So you can see we're trying to achieve an effect that this is, it's kind of like not engraved on it, like it's been painted on it and it has a shadow. So it's like a 3D form that we're trying to achieve. So we're going to do that once more. So just tap once more and there you go. As you can see, I'm going to just turn off the selection. You can see it's got a nice shadow down here. So that's a very quick way to add shadows as well. And yeah, I think we're good with that. Okay, so let's see, maybe we can enhance the shadow a little bit more. In fact, I've just done 2 taps. We don't really need to do more because then there'll be a gap between the lighter part and the shadow, and we don't want that. We want these to be continuous. So let's go ahead and just duplicate this darken layer once more. And as you can see, it's darkened definitely. It's looking so much better. You've got a nice gradient here as well between all of these lights and shadows and all of these. It's looking very nice. Amazing. I'm pretty happy with that. I think we can clean up a little bit here though, because I think there's a little bit section here that we can maybe move around. So I'm just going to turn off alpha lock for all of these layers and then just quickly make some changes. I just don't want these to be going onto the white. If you don't have this on your end, that's great. But yeah, I'm just going to do that from mine. There you go, I think that looks better. Let me see if it's the same here as well. You could totally have done this in the previous step itself when you were cleaning up and not have to do it all individually in all of these layers right now, but sorry about that. Alright, so this looks great. We've got our shadows and the patterns ready for the base. And now we're going to just add in some texture to our base. So let's go ahead and do that. We are going to go right above this base layer. And then we're going to create a new clipping mask right above that. Okay. And basically what this means is that you will have your texture only on the sea green part and not on this blue part. All right, and that's something that we want in this. You can obviously just have the texture all over the treasure chest as well if you want, but I think it brings about an interesting variation of texture, so I'm just having it above the sea green part only. So we've got the blend mode as normal. Let's leave it at that. And for our texture, we'll just go to charcoals and select the willow charcoal brush. Okay. And let's select this second blue color in our color palette, and then we can have a brush size of around 15% and very lightly just paint in a nice texture. If you're very strong with your brush, you won't have much of a texture, okay? So just move it around in light circles, just so that you have a nice soft texture. And that's it. And then you can reduce the opacity down to around, I'd say, 80%. And there you go, you've got a lovely, nice soft texture around here. I think that looks great. Okay, so we've got a texture done. Next we're going to be painting in some shadows caused by all of the metal work on top of the base. So let's go ahead and create those. And for that, we'll create a new clipping mask right on the top. Okay, and then change the blend mode to multiply. We'll go back to our, should we go back to our technical pen brush for this? Because mainly, remember how we've got a shadow on this side of the frames? So we want our base here to be in the shadows as well, so we need to add in those. So we're going to select the gray color and then just paint in this gray here, and then again on this side paint the gray, so you can see it's continuous now. The shadow, the entire thing is in the shadow, exactly what we want. Okay, and also because our star is up here, so we need a shadow on that too. So let's go ahead and paint in some shadows for that. Let's see what we can do. Maybe just something light like that over here, because we know that this part is going to be visible, as is this section here. And we know that this section is going to be in shadows too. Just something like that. And here too. Alright, so we've got our shadows over here. I think that looks great. And next we're going to create one more clipping mask on top of this. And then change the blend mode to multiply again. We're adding some more shadows, mainly caused by the frame now on this. So let's go ahead and select the soft airbrush for this. And we can increase the brush size to around 20-25% or so. And then just lightly paint in some shadows right around here at the edge, just like that. To bring in a bit more depth, I think we can add a bit more shadow around the star too. Okay, I think that looks great. Don't really need to be adding in any more over here at the bottom, but just some shadows over here, some of them here. That looks good. We can even go ahead and blend them out slightly. You don't need to go too much into detail, but just slightly. Yeah. And let's see, maybe blend it up slightly up here too. Okay, so I think that looks much better. It's got so much more depth already. That looks great. We can reduce the opacity very slightly down to around 90%. And I think that works. Okay, so for the last step for our base here, we just need to add a small highlight. So let's create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add, and then we've still got our gray color selected. We are going to place in a very slight highlight just around here at the top. So you can imagine it would come somewhere between these two gems here and these two gems here, so roughly around there. Alright, and then you can use your smudge tool again. And just lightly go ahead and smudge it in. Okay, and then we can reduce the opacity very slightly down to around 80% so that it blends in. And there you go, your base is ready, and I think that looks lovely. Okay, so let's start working on the gems now. So we will go back to our gems layer, which is right here, and then create a new clipping mask for this one and change the blend mode to linear burn. All right, We've still got our soft airbrush selected, and now we can use this second blue color, the teal blue color that I like calling teal. Yeah. Alright, we are going to reduce our brush size to somewhere around 10% and then just paint in a slight shadowy kind of effect on one lower end. So I'm going with the left lower end of the gems. So just paint in a circular lower end darker bluish color. And then we can go ahead and blend this out as well. And if you feel like you've lost a lot of color in the blending, just reapply some more. Okay, so that looks great. Next we're going to create another clipping mask and then change the blend mode of this layer to color dodge. And with the same blue color, we're going to be painting in some central blue color here. And then go ahead and lightly blend that in too. Alright, so I think that looks great. Next we are going to create one more clipping mask, change the blend mode this time to lighten, and we're going to select the white color. And then we'll be painting in just some whitish color here at the top. So you might want to increase your brush size for this to around 20%. But we will, not 20, I suppose maybe somewhere around 12ish. But we want the white color to be on the opposite side. So maybe if you've got the blue side on the lower left, you can have the whitish color on the upper right. And this is just trying to get a variation of colors in these beads, the gems. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and blend them again. You don't need to blend it too much, just enough that you're getting all the colors melding in slightly. We're going to be reducing the opacity in a second. Alright, so let's reduce the opacity of this layer down to 80%. And then we're creating one last clipping mask, and then we're changing the blend mode to add this time. And let's go ahead and paint in some highlights for this. So your highlights can basically be, oh, that's too much. I reduce my brush size to around 7ish%. We are just painting in a highlight. As you can see, it's not completely at the edge. there's this gap between the highlight and the frame. So this is just as a shiny part that shows basically that this gem is spherical, and we're painting in this little highlight. Then you can go ahead and slightly blend it in. And we can actually reduce the opacity of this layer first and then see how much we really need to blend in. So I would reduce it down to around 40%, and then we can go ahead and start blending it in so that it's not too stark. Okay, so I think those look great. We've got our gems ready now, and beautiful. So I'm just going to slightly blend this in a little bit more because I don't want them to be too shiny. But yeah, okay, so those look great. So the next thing we're going to be working on would be the sockets over here, just below the gems. So let's go ahead and work on those. I'm just grouping our gems layers together, and then we're going to rename the group as gems, and then we can go ahead and create a new clipping mask to the sockets layer, and then we're going to change the blend mode of this one to multiply. And let's go ahead and select the gray color. We've still got our soft airbrush selected, and let's go ahead and paint in some shadows. So for our shadows, we actually need to see this a bit better. So I'm just going to reduce the opacity of our upper frame layer a bit so you can see exactly where we've got our shadows. And right, so our shadows need to be placed on the lower surface of the gems, right? So you can imagine that they're casting a shadow because of their shape onto the socket. So you can make use of your quick shape function, which is just like keep holding your pencil before you let go so that it turns into a proper arc. Alright, so that looks great, and let's bring back the opacity slightly to just have a look. How are we doing? Yeah, it's looking good. Okay, so now we can just reduce the opacity of this shadow layer to somewhere around 50%, because we don't want them to be too dark, but just enough to know that they're there. You can enhance this up slightly if you want. Okay, so I think that looks great. Next we're going to add in some highlights on the opposite end of these sockets so that we're able to see them a bit better. And let's create a clipping mask for that. Change the blend mode to add, and again I would just want our sketch layer to be back on. Change the blend mode to multiply again, and then I'm going to reduce the opacity so that it's just there and we can see where we're placing in our highlights. So there you go. I think that looks better, doesn't it? We're able to see exactly where our highlights and shadows are. So for these, I would actually place them at the periphery so that we're able to differentiate their shadows and the highlights. Differentiate the entire socket, I mean, from the frame. So go ahead and place in those highlights right at the edge, and you can blend them in slightly. Alright, so I think that looks so much better. We were able to see our sockets here as we can differentiate them from the frame now. That looks great. Now we just want to add a bit more texture to the metal frame entirely, and that will be the same for the sockets as well. So while we're on the sockets section, let's just go ahead and add in that texture here too. So for that, we are going to create a new clipping mask right above the base for the sockets. And then we're going to change the blend mode to multiply. And for the texture for this metal section, we are going to go to textures in the brush library, and then we're going to select the Currawong brush. I think that's how you pronounce it, Currawong, I'm not sure. But we're going to select that brush. And then we've still got the same gray color. I've got an opacity of around 75% for the brush, and a brush size of around 6%, that should do. So very lightly, just paint in some texture for these sockets. And then we'll repeat the step for this by adding another layer. We can change the blend mode of this clipping mask to color dodge. And this time, let's select the sea green color for this. With the same brush, I would just maybe tilt the canvas slightly, because we want a ghostly sea green kind of color, ambience light to be on the entire frame. So we're trying to achieve that. We're going to reduce the opacity down to around 25% for this. Alright, so we have got all of our gems ready along with their sockets. So as you can see, we've got them all here. I'm going to group our sockets layers together, rename this group as sockets, and then we're just going to group our gems and sockets layers together as well so that they're all in one, just for ease's sake. And then just rename this as gems. Not guns, no, not guns, gems. Alright, so that's done. We'll start with adding in some more textures to the star and the rest of the frame now. Okay, so let's get started with the star now. I'm going to turn off our sketch layer because it's really not needed anymore. And now we've got our star frame layer here. Let's create a new clipping mask right above it. And then we're going to change the blend mode to multiply. We're going to be painting in the texture again with the same Currawong brush. And this time we'll select the grey color, and then we can just go ahead and paint in a slight texture to the frame, and then we can reduce the opacity of this layer down to around 60%. We don't want this texture to be taken over quite a lot, so just about 60% should be fine, and you can add in slight more color if you want. Yeah, I think that looks great. Alright, so next we're going to be adding in some highlights to this. So create a new clipping mask on top of the star frames layers as such. And then we'll change the blend mode for this one to screen. And then we can perhaps select the soft airbrush. For your brush, we've still got a grey color selected. And then what we really need to do is figure out where we're placing in our highlights. So as I mentioned, again, lights coming from here, lights coming from here. So we'll just start off with adding in some shadows, some highlights around here. One more thing that you can do perhaps is, we've got our highlights, our shadows on layer 28 here. You can select this layer and then invert it so that our highlights are only on the top frame here that you can see. So that's what we really want to achieve. So go back to your screen layer once you've done that, and then you can start painting in the highlights for this. So just like that around here, maybe a slight highlight there too. And then maybe here we can have a bit more of a highlight on the interior rather than on the exterior surface. Similarly on the right side of the star here, just something like this. So you can imagine that the left side of the star has these highlights on the outer edge, whereas the right side of the star has it more on the inner edge. And then let's just use our smudge tool, the soft airbrush as our smudge tool, and lightly blend in these highlights. Alright, so that's great. Next we'll be painting in some, we're working on this keyhole now, basically. So you can see that we want it to actually look like a keyhole with a deep interior over here. So to do that, we'll create a new layer below the keyhole. And then, we've still got a soft airbrush selected, that's fine. Let's just paint in some grey color below the keyhole, just so that that's an interior, just like that. Okay, next we can duplicate this layer, and then we can change the blend mode of the top layer to multiply, reduce the opacity down to around, let's say 85%, and then we're going to create a clipping mask on top of this layer, change the blend mode to color burn, and then we can paint in an interior shadow, just so that it looks like there's a depth to this keyhole, just like that. Okay, and then you can go ahead and blend that in too. Just make sure that there is a lighter edge remaining at this end. As you can see, there's lighter here and then it becomes darker, so that it gives the impression of depth as such. Okay, so it's looking much better now, isn't it? Exactly. Then we can reduce this layer's opacity slightly down to around 80%, and I think that works. The only reason why we're doing it like this with so many different blending modes is because we're not using a very large color palette. As you've noticed, we've just got these 5 colors, and we'll use the 6th one for the background. But we've just got these 5 colors and we're doing everything in a limited palette. And that works out very well. We just have to take advantage of these blending modes instead. Okay, so next we'll be working on the frame of this keyhole. So create a clipping mask for that. Change the blend mode to multiply. We'll add in some shadows first. So we've still got our gray color selected and the soft airbrush. Now, as you can imagine, we are going to have our shadows over here. It's basically going to follow the same pattern as the star frame here as well. So let's go ahead and emulate the same thing. So you can imagine that the highlight's going to be on the top edge here, so the shadow's going to be on this end. So let's create that. That's already giving an impression that it's raised, isn't it? So yeah. Alright, so that's that. Let's create one more clipping mask on top, and then we're going to change the blend mode of this one to screen and add in our highlights. So highlights are going to be opposite to our shadows. I didn't complete that sentence. Alright, so we're done with our highlights and shadows for the keyframe. I think that looks beautiful. So the next thing that we'll be working on would be adding in some shadows to our dots here, the white shadows, white dots I mean. So let's go ahead and do that now. So I'm just going to remove our selection tool for once. I think what we can also do perhaps is, if we go back to our star frame layer here, maybe we can just very lightly, not the star frame layer, sorry, one of these, maybe the lower multiplied layer here, you can very gently just blend in the exterior here. See if it makes a difference at all. Yeah, because it kind of gives a softer edge to the star. So we're using the top multiply layer, not the one below, just to give it a very soft edge. Well, you can use both of them. I think you'll need to get a softer edge on both. Yeah, I think that gives it a good kind of feeling, rather than just having it as a very stark shadow, stark edge I mean. Why am I erasing this? Sorry. Okay, so I think that looks nice. We're okay with this. Next, let's go ahead and work on our dots here. So we'll select the dots layer, create a clipping mask for this, and then change the blend mode to linear burn. We're going to use the dark blue color, and then all we need to do is just paint in some contour, like shadows as such, just to make them look a bit more spherical as such. Now try and follow their positions on the star. Right, so that's that. And then let's go ahead and just slightly blend them in. Okay, and we're going to reduce the opacity down to 40% because we don't want it to look too blue, but just enough to give us a nice shadow there. I think that looks great. Yeah, and if you have certain areas that you'd want to embellish, again, to enhance, I mean, go ahead and do that. Yeah, I think that looks great. So the next thing we're going to do is add in some shadows for these. So to do that, we're going to duplicate this white dots layer, not the clipping mask. So we're duplicating that, and then we're selecting the lower layer, turn on alpha lock, and then we are going to select our gray color here, go back to the layers option, and the alpha locked layer, just tap on fill layer so that the whole layer fills in with gray as we wanted. Turn off your alpha lock, and then we are going to select the transform tool there so that we get the box. And again, just the same way that we added our shadows, that's basically what we've created with the gray dots now. We're going to be just tapping one layer or two layers below, like 2 taps below, and you can see that suddenly we've got shadows for our white dots. So I've tapped like thrice, I think, and I think that should be enough for this. We can then apply some Gaussian blur to this, just about 1% or so. Don't think we really need to apply some more. I'm gonna see if we need to tap in a bit more. Yeah, I think 4 taps downward really helps. So we've got shadows for our white dots as well. Those look great. Let's add in a bit more color to the star background here, the sea green background. So to do that, we are going to select our sea green star layer, create a new clipping mask, and then we will change the blend mode to color burn. Okay, now for our brush for this, I'm going to try something fun this time. We can go to abstract and then select the Opticon brush. So we are done with that. I've got a brush size of around 72%, full opacity, and for this you can choose any of these 3 colors. I'll start with, I think I can probably work with the teal blue color, the second blue one. You can choose either of them really, it doesn't matter, because Opticon is kind of like it changes its color basically, as you can see. It changes the color as you create your brush. So your pattern might look very different from mine. Don't worry, whatever works, just have a look and see at what point are you satisfied. Because it might take a couple of tries to get the perfect one that you like. But yeah, just try out whichever one. You can even try out different colors if you want. Because I think I might like to have a bit bluer. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I think that looks nice. Might even see what do I get with sea green. Let's see what do I get with white instead. Nope. I actually like it with the dark blue, so I'm going to add in some more with the dark blue. Yeah, I think that looks great. Okay, so that works for me. Just have a go and see. I kind of want a bit more of a bluer edge than green rather, because the green's getting a bit lost. So that works. If you're able to get something like this, great. If not, keep trying. And whatever you're happy with, that works too. Alright, so once you're done with this step, we're going to just add a bit more shadows from the star frame onto the star base. So to do that, we will go back to our... Actually, that's fine. We are still on the base. This is where we want our shadows. So create a new clipping mask on top of this Opticon layer. Change the blend mode to multiply And then we're going to go back to our soft airbrush, and this time, actually no, let's go back to our technical pen brush instead. We want some sharper shadows, just like this one here that we created with our technical pen brush. So let's go back to that, choose the gray color, and we can increase the brush size somewhere around 27-28%. And we just want to add in some shadows here for our star frame, just like that. Something like this. Yeah, maybe a very slight shadow up here. Alright, so I think that looks nice. We can reduce the opacity down to around 65%. I might just make these a bit straighter maybe. Yeah, perfect. Now we'll create a clipping mask below this one, so right above the Opticon layer again. Change it to multiply, and then we'll select our soft airbrush. We'll be creating some softer shadows, just like we did for the base here. So let's go ahead and paint in some shadows right around here. And we also want some shadows from the frame here too. Don't forget the keyframe. Keyhole frame, I mean. So it's looking so much more 3D now, doesn't it? Exactly what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and just blend these shadows in slightly. Okay, I think that looks great. I'm going to reduce the opacity of this layer slightly down to around 80%. And voila, we've got our star ready now. I think that looks great. Okay, so once we are done with that, we can go ahead and just group. Actually, our star layers are all grouped together. Forget it. All right, it's time to work on the frame now. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go back to our upper frame. So we're going to be working with the upper frame, lower frame, and the feet at the same time because they're essentially the same kind of steps with very minute varying changes that I'll guide you through. So we'll start off with the upper frame, and then we'll create a new clipping mask. Let's say we can maybe just move it right above the base, right? Change the blend mode to multiply, and you know the drill. We're still using our Karawang brush for the texture, and we've got the gray color selected already. Let's go ahead and paint in some texture. It's a great brush to add in some metallic texture as such. Because our opacity is lowered to 75%, if you add in another one on top of it, it's going to make certain sections darker, which we want to kind of avoid. So let's not do that. We're going to reduce the opacity down to 40% so that it's just there. It's not too textured as such. You can perhaps just add in one more coat if you want to that, but not too much, right? Just enough. So let's repeat the same step for the lower frame. So create a new clipping mask just above the base. Change the blend mode to multiply and reduce the opacity down to 40%. And add in some texture. Now for this, I would just tilt in the brush a bit, the canvas a bit, to give it a bit more of a dimension. because essentially this is kind of like a stamp brush. We just need to change the position of the canvas to be able to take best advantage of this. So we've done that, and then we can do the same for the feet as well. So this time we'll create a clipping mask above this sea green border layer. Change the blend mode to multiply, and then again reduce the opacity down to 40%. Paint in your texture. Alright, we've got a lovely texture there. We're going to repeat this step with green color now. Sea green color. So create a new clipping mask above the grey texture layer. Change your blend mode this time to color dodge, and we will paint our texture with the sea green color. So just rotate your canvas a bit, paint in the sea green color. And then we're going to just reduce the opacity of this layer quite significantly down to around 20% or so. Yeah, I think 20% really helps because we really want a soft greenish kind of ambience with this. So we'll be using sea green and grey as a part of our highlights and shadows later on. So yeah, let's repeat this step for the lower frame as well. So create a new clipping mask above the grey textured layer. Change your blend mode to color dodge. Reduce the opacity down to 20% already, because we know that's how much we want the final one to be. Then we're going to paint in the green texture. Okay, that looks great. And then let's repeat the step for the feet as well. So color dodge on a new clipping mask, reduce the opacity down to 20%. Add in this color. Okay, so we've got some nice texture going on for our metal frames here. That's exactly what we want. So the next thing that we're going to be working on would be changing the background color, because we're going to be adding in a lot of highlights now, and those highlights, the effect for those highlights will come out really well if we can see the background as a dark one. So to do that, we are going to basically just select the background color. We've got this really dark blue color here right at the end of our color palette, so tap on that and there you go. Our background color has been changed to this beautiful navy bluish kind of color, and I think that looks lovely. So let's get started by adding in some highlights now. So we will go back to our frames layer now. So upper frame, right to the top, let's create a new clipping mask, and then we're going to change the blend mode of this one to color dodge, and we can select the soft airbrush, and we've still got our sea green color selected right here. Now all we're going to do is paint in some highlights around the edges. So I've got a 20% brush size. It allows me enough space to be able to work comfortably with it. I'm just going to add in some highlights around these edges. We'll be blending a lot, don't worry. We'll also be reducing the opacity because I know it's a bit too bright and dark, bright and green, which we don't want. But that's okay. So mainly just around the top here, we want a connecting bar of color. And then otherwise, we want this to be at the borders. Okay, and especially for the side and the shadow, be very careful to not go too beyond the border, because we don't want it to be going into the shadow side a lot. Okay, so very lightly just paint in some of this. And then we can reduce the opacity down to around 30%, I think should be good. That's automatically going to take care of a lot of the highlights and everything for us, reducing the opacity. And then you can use your soft airbrush to lightly blend in the highlights just closer to the borders, and spread this out a bit more if you want on the top end. So blend, blend, blend. And just on the shadow side specifically, try and keep the highlights to a minimum, just so that they're very close to the border edge and not just, going onto the main body, because that'll take away the effect of the shadow as such. So as you can see, I've got a very thin sliver of highlights on the shadows. Alright, so I think that looks great. Let's repeat this step for the lower frame here as well. So we're going to create a new clipping mask on top of the lower frame section, change the blend mode to color dodge, reduce the opacity down to 30%. Let's get started. Okay, I think we might be able to add in a little bit of highlight to the top layer here as well, just around the edge here. I forgot to add some there. If you've already added that, that's great. Okay, so next thing we're going to be working on the feet. So create a new clipping mask there, change the blend mode to color dodge, reduce the opacity down to 30%, and we can paint in some highlights here, the edges. And I can see that the feet here are a bit too broad, so I actually might be able to go back to the lower frame section and just erase part of this so that it becomes a bit more congruent with the actual outline of the feet. Yeah, that fits in better. Okay, so I think that looks great. So the next thing we're going to be working on is adding in some more highlights, but for this one we need to basically just make sure that none of our highlights now proceed onto the darker sections here. the shadows that we had created over on the other sides. So we want to eliminate all of our shadows on those ends. So let's go ahead and do that. We will start with the top frame first. So by that I mean, like, you can see that these are our shadow layers here. So we want to select that and then tap on invert. So those areas are deselected for us. And we'll create a new clipping mask on top now. And then we're going to change the blend mode to color dodge again. And we will select the gray color this time. And then for this, all we really need to do is just add in some highlights at the edges, just like this, as you can see. This is what's really helping it brighten up at the edges. The green color gave it a greenish kind of a tinge, but this gray color with the color dodge mode brings in a bit more of a whitish kind of a highlight. And because it's a blending mode already, we're able to see that it has an effect with the underlying green color, and it's not an opaque white shadow, white highlight, which we don't want. So that's looking pretty nice, yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and blend while we've still got our selection on. So once you've got something like this, we're going to reduce the opacity down now, again, to 40%. We're basically building up our highlights rather than having them all in one layer. Because remember, this is not a very highly polished kind of a metal, it's giving it a bit of a weathered effect. So that's why we want to be very gentle with the highlights and not have it too shiny. Right, so that's looking beautiful. You can remove the selection now and just lightly blend it at the edge. I think that looks great. Okay, so let's repeat this step now for the lower frame layer now. And we are going to see where we've got our shadows in this layer, so select that shadow layer, tap on invert, and then create a new clipping mask. So the shadow layer that I had selected was layer 20. So the new clipping mask, change the blend mode to color dodge. We're reducing the opacity down to 40% already because we know that that's what we're doing. And then let's paint in our highlights. And then we can blend these. Okay, so remove your selection now, and you can see it's looking so much nicer. looks great. Let's repeat the step for our feet as well. And we've got our shadows on this layer 21. We're going to select, tap on invert, create a new clipping mask on top, change the blend mode to color dodge again, and reduce the opacity down to 40%. So let's go ahead and paint in our highlights. I think we can even paint in some highlights at the lower edge. Alright, so I think that looks great. We've got all of our highlights and shadows there. We'll add in one more highlight layer. So to do that, again, we're going to start off with the upper layer, create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add, and then we're going to keep the same thing. I think we can select the shadow layer, tap on invert again, and then go to your new layer, and this is going to just enhance some of these highlights. So as you can see, we've got a nice soft highlight here, and especially because in this one we have gone across the connecting bar between the two edges, so that kind of helps. Yeah, and then we can reduce the opacity of this layer down to around 70%, so that it's not too bright and shiny, but just enough. So remove your selection, see if you need to, oh, got low battery. Give me 1 second, I'll just put this on charge. Okay, sorry about that. I've just plugged in the charger for my iPad, so this is exactly what happens when you forget to charge in your iPad, since you've been drawing way too much. Alright, so let's get started with the highlights again. I'm still on the top frame. I think it might be helpful to add in a little bit of this last highlight layer at the edges as well of the shadows, just so that we're able to distinguish them slightly. And considering how our highlights are also on this end, maybe, just maybe, we might be able to move our shadow layers above our highlight layers and see if that makes a difference in maintaining the depth of the shadows. So we'll try that in a minute. Let me just blend this in and see what we can do. Alright, so by that I literally meant if we can perhaps just select both of our multiply layers here, and then if we move them above our highlight layers, so you can see it just automatically becomes so much darker here at the edge, and our highlight edges are just enhanced quite a bit. I think that works. I think that definitely brings out the depth a bit more than letting it get lost with the color highlights there. So I think we can do that for all of our layers. Yeah, so I think we can move on to the lower frame now. So we've got our multiply layers here, 2 of them. I'm just going to move them above our highlight layers. And then we're going to create a new clipping mask again, just like we did for the other one. Change the blend mode to add and reduce the opacity down to around 70%. Let's get started by adding in our highlights for this. Again, we need to just select this, the shadow layer. Okay, select it, tap on invert, and then go back to your add layer, and then paint in your highlights. Okay, let's remove the selection and we're going to go back to the edge here for our highlights. And this time I think what we can do is we can select the inner edge layer here. Select that, tap on invert, and now you can work on adding in your highlights on the add layer so that they don't go onto the inner edge. Blend, blend, blend. And there you go. So you can remove the selection now, and that looks much nicer. Alright, so next thing are the feet. So we're going to go into the feet section. Then we're going to move the multiply layers above. So I'm just selecting them both together, and then we're going to move them as a pair above the highlight layers. Create a new clipping mask just below the shadow layers, change the blend mode to add, and then reduce the opacity down to 70%. Okay, and then we're going to select our shadow layer, tap on invert, and then go back to our add layer. Let's paint in the remaining highlights. Okay, before you go ahead and blend this one, I think we can just remove the selection and then blend in these highlights gently onto the top. And then you can go ahead and add in some highlights at the other ends as well. And then blend them in. Okay, so we've added in our highlights. We're done with all of that, and that looks very pretty, I think. So next thing that we're going to work on, we're closing up. We're almost finished with this whole thing. That looks pretty. Okay, so the next thing we're going to work on is by adding in some more shadows to our facets. Like we've got these facets here because they've just become a bit lighter with all of these highlights now. So I want to enhance those shadows a bit more and add in some more shadows to these sockets too. So let's go ahead and do that too. So we are going to close in the feet section right now, and I'm going to create a new clipping mask right on top in the upper frame group. Change the blend mode to multiply, And then we can add in some shadows. So by that I meant something like this. Some softer shadows. We've already got our darker shadows as an edge right here with the technical pen brush, but we can add in some softer ones as well. Just going to enhance the look of depth and some shadows here. Okay, and then we can blend these as well. And then I want to add in some softer shadow to our star as well. Just like that. Maybe just add in a little bit more shadows in some areas, just to bring about a bit more of a variation if we want. And then you can blend those in too. Just take care not to mess up the socket shadows like I have. Okay, so I think that's giving it a nice weathered kind of a look, definitely. And as for this section, you can just enhance the shadows by painting it in. Just like that. And then we're going to just blend it slightly. I know it's looking too dark. We can reduce the opacity now down to around 50%. I think that looks much better. It's got a nice depth to it, and you can appreciate it a bit more if you remove that, and suddenly you've got more shadow and depth. It looks more realistic in a way. So I think that's looking great. We can then repeat the same step for the lower frame too. So we're going to create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply and reduce the opacity down to 50% already. And then we can increase the shadow, especially down here where we've got the top frame's shadow. And I've just realized I haven't painted a shadow here. So let me just do that with our technical pen brush. Yes, it should be here, I think, in this layer. Okay, so I'll probably have to enhance it on the inner edge rather than on the other one. And that is fine. Yeah, that works. So we're going back to our new shadow layer that we've created. Just painting in this shadow here. Then we can blend this. Right, and enhance the shadow from the star, the facets again. Maybe we can put in a slight shadow here on the inner edges. That looks nice. Just a bit. And we can increase the shadow a little bit here. And just the same way that we'd added in patches or shadows, on the other side we can do them here as well. Okay, so that looks great. And then we're just going to repeat the same step for the feet as well. We are going to create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply, and reduce the opacity down to 50%. Now facets for this one would be over here. Then maybe we can enhance the top sections as well for the shadows. Alright, and then add random spots for shadows otherwise, but just variations. Alright, so that's looking pretty nice. Alright, one last thing that we can do is to just add in a line of inner shadow here on the top frame and the lower frame. So I'm creating a new clipping mask, and then I'm going to change the blend mode to multiply, and then just very slightly paint in an inner shadow just in this section. Oh, we're on the wrong layer, sorry. Let's go back here, just blending it in so that it's a very fine line rather than such a thick line here, which we don't need. Alright, so that looks great. And let's just bring down the opacity of this one to around 60%, I think. Yeah, because we don't want it to be too dark and unnecessary, but I think this looks just good enough that there is a shadow, there's a distinction. Alright, so let's just quickly repeat this step for the inner frame, the lower frame as well. Create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply, and reduce the opacity down to 60%. So inner layer there, we need one for the star as well. Okay, so that looks great. We are done adding our shadows there. And just for the last bit, before we move on to a quick background touch-up, we want to give the impression that this back section of the frame, the top frame, is receding into the back like that, like a curve in there. So that's why we are just going to create one last clipping mask to this upper frame group, and then change the blend mode to multiply again, and I'm just going to paint in slight grey here. So this, as you can see, is giving the impression that it's receding downward and has more depth, and that's it. You really don't need to add in a lot more in there, or even add in here, because as you can see, we can't really see the frame on this section going into the back, but we can over there. This definitely adds in a lot of depth to this entire treasure chest, and I think that looks great. Alright, so now it's time to just finish everything up by adding in a little bit of a glow to our background right behind the chest. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. So let's create a new layer below the base group, and we're not changing the blend mode or anything, but we're selecting this second blue color, and we've got our soft brush selected in airbrushing. You can increase the brush size to around 8% or so. No, actually, let's go up to around 14 or 15%. And all that we're doing is just painting in a nice glow like this around the treasure chest, around each of the edges. It'd be better if we don't make an entire circle like that, because that's going to take away from the subtle glow that we're trying to achieve here. Just soft glows behind each of the 4 surfaces here for the chest, and then you can apply a soft Gaussian blur to this. I'd say around 24-25%. That looks lovely. And I would also just blur out any of them that you feel are a bit too broad. I think here is proceeding a bit way too much beyond the margin for me. So I'm going to just slightly blend this in. Yeah. Let's see, maybe. Alright, so that looks great. And just for the last bit, if you want, you can make this even dreamier by adding in some bokeh lights. So we're going to create one layer above the central glow layer, and then we're going to change the blend mode of this one to add, and then go to luminance, select the bokeh lights brush. Now we still got I think we can use the sea green color, and then just lightly paint in some dreamy bokeh lights. Alright, so if you think that this is too bright, you can always reduce the opacity down to around 60% or so. I think I can increase it up to around 75% or something. Don't want the effect to be taken away, like the bokeh effect to be taking the, let's say, the light away from the treasure chest itself, so I might reduce it even further down to around 60%. And there we go. We have just completed this treasure chest, guys. Thank you so much for joining me in this tutorial. I really appreciate it. I know it's a long one, lots of details, lots of fine work in there, but the end result is just amazing to look at. Thank you so much for joining me in this one. So guys, if you'd like to share your creation with me online, remember to tag me in your post on Instagram. I absolutely love seeing your versions of the tutorials and sharing them on my page. And make sure to subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this tutorial too. And don't forget to check out my other videos. I've got so many more magical projects waiting for you. New tutorials come out every 2 weeks on my channel, so hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.